What do you call Ivan the Terrible being nice to you? Sarcasm. Hi, welcome to Russian History of Russia. My name is Asya, and today we're covering this wonderful period that literally nobody gives a crap about because it's just some blah in between the two famous Ivans, the great one and the terrible one. So just for shits and giggles, let's break it up a bit and first paint the picture of what Russian society even looked like at the time.
It's big, it's cold, it's full of gas and gold. It's 1200 years old, but still never does as told. We're Christians, but not really Europeans, but from Asia. We send the dogs to space and kill the tsars on occasion. We drink sodas made from bread, eat our enemies in kasha, and that's why it's so fun to study history of Russia.
So, with the age of Ivan III, Russia firmly enters the late medieval period, where feudal principles and verbal traditions solidify and become written law, especially when it comes to social structure and social classes. We don't have surviving statistics, but the estimates suggest that Russia entered the 16th century with about 6.5 million people living in it. 2 people per square kilometer on average, 5 in the most populated areas, while the rest of Europe had about 10 to 30 people per square kilometer. That wasn't entirely because of the landmass. As I mentioned in the previous episodes, prior to expanding into Siberia, the size of Russia was very comparable to European kingdoms and empires. However, that land was unevenly populated due to landscape and climate differences, and the most pleasant areas in the south and southwest that were good for farming and easy to get around were constantly suffering from wars, raids, and plagues, often losing substantial parts of the population. And by the end of the 16th century, the things turned particularly grim, and the country was virtually empty. Like in any medieval state, peasantry was the absolute majority of the Russian society, about 90% of it, and farming was the bread and butter of the economy. Get it? Bread and butter? Rye and oats were the most popular grains, hemp and flax production crops. However, harvesting enough food was a constant uphill battle. Russian peasants had double or at best triple harvests in relation to what they sowed, as in from 1 bag of rye sowed, you would get 2 to 3 bags harvested. You would need 1 bag to sow next spring, pay hefty taxes with the remaining grain, and whatever the difference was, that is all you and your family had to rely on for the rest of the year. No wonder the population wasn't exactly booming. In the cities, you have your garden variety mix of merchants, artisans, military, and clergy, the latter two practically exempt from taxation. And finally, on the opposite side of the born to be lucky and lucky to be born spectrum, you have the nobles, collectively known in Russian as dворяне. Ivan III began the landowner's transition from semi-independent state to an inherited servitude to the ruler, soon to be universally known as the Tsar. This service began at the age of 15 and lasted until death. More than anything, it meant military and government service and, of course, undying political loyalty. In return, the nobles had their lands and many privileges. Beginning 16th century, typically huge estates known as votchina that could include dozens of villages are broken up into smaller pieces known as поместья and their owners as помещики. Unlike votchina that was just yours to own and give to your children, поместье was actually conditional on your service to the Tsar. You kind of owned it and your sons kind of inherited it, but technically the Tsar could take it all away if you were, say, naughty. That will change in the later centuries, but in 16th and 17th that was the deal. The top few most aristocratic families, known as Boyari, the Boyars, were particularly close to the Tsar. Their members held the highest positions positions in government and military, and also formed the Boyar Duma, the aristocratic council to the Tsar, and of course ran the biggest estates. They had a lot of weight. In fact, in 16th, 17th century, their power grew so much that they ruled Russia instead of a monarch on several occasions, or at least decided who gets to occupy the throne. In 1497, Ivan III solidified a lot of these interclass relations on paper in his Sudebnik, a new code of law. It expanded and clarified legal proceedings, criminal and administrative law, penalties, fines, punishments, judicial bodies, and was overall just a really good case of a medieval legal codex that was crucial for centralization of power. However, there was one notable common tradition that Sudebnik made into a law. It legalized peasants' right to leave their feudal lord once a year after paying the exit fee. This tradition existed for a while. On so-called Yuri's Day, 26th of November, which is right after the end of the farming cycle, you could theoretically switch landlords, but that wasn't really regulated one way or another. And while it might sound like a good thing that gave peasants at least some control over their fate, it was actually the opposite. They could choose to leave before and strike some sort of deal with their landlord, but this law made it entirely legally impossible to leave at any other time but those 2 weeks. This was the turning point where Russian peasants who had certain rights and freedoms before began their transformation into serfs. Being chained to the land and locked in servitude practically meant that their landlords owned them, which is also often known as slavery. A century later, where a number of devastating hungers, wars, and failed internal politics led to a dip in population, many farmlands were abandoned, and the government was wondering where the hell did everybody go. So they began tracking down whoever was still alive and forcing them back into their farms. So in the 1590s, even that 2-week switch period was eliminated. Finally, in the 1649 Code of Law, this servitude became officially termless. Serfs were born into servitude to one master, and unless they were sold, they died in it. They were now fully legally dependent on their lord and had no personal rights or freedoms. The only thing the lords technically couldn't do to them was just murder them, but even that was negotiable. And things would not really change much until the Emancipation of Serfs reform of 1861, which, by my humble calculations, is a long-ass time to have the absolute majority of your population practically enslaved. And that little peculiarity of Russian society certainly played a role in the Russian Revolution and what fueled it a few centuries later, but we'll get to that. Now, on that cheery note, let's go back a bit to where we left off in the previous episode with the whole ruling of Russia business. So, after Ivan III died in 1505, the power went to his son Vasily III. There was some sort of drama with some nephew trying to take over, but that didn't stick. Vasily was an okay ruler. He didn't do anything particularly crazy, continued his father's legacy, added some more lands, most of them already halfway there, including Novgorod, had another completely pointless war with Lithuania, a couple other semi-successful wars with Kazan Khanate, got some weird abscess on his thigh, possibly cancer, and died in 1533. Wow, good thing not all history is as fun as this guy. Anywho, Vasily III had no children with his first Russian wife, who he managed to divorce and not even murder. Said boring. And with his second Lithuanian wife, he had 2 sons, Ivan and Yuri. Ivan was only 3 when his father died in 1533, so his Lithuanian mother, Yelena Glinskaya, became the regent ruler. Well, she didn't exactly become one. Her husband, in his will, actually left a whole bunch of 7 boyar regents, but Yelena just wasn't that kind of girl. She managed to take power, and not only that, but while being loathed and constantly sabotaged by boyars, do some good and noteworthy things with that power in a very short time. She struck a very favorable for Russia peace with Lithuania after a Lithuanian-Muscovite War number 8056, reformed the currency system, introducing unified silver dinga across all Russian lands, and hired another Italian architect to build the Kitai-Gorodskaya Wall that fortified the aristocratic city quarter right outside of Moscow Kremlin. It directly translates as Chinatown Wall, and so does the neighborhood to this day, although nobody knows exactly why. The only thing that we do know about that is that it had nothing to do with China at any point. Today, only a tiny piece of that wall survives. The rest was neglected for a really long time and finally torn down in 1934. Yelena Glinskaya died in 1538 at the ripe age of only 30, so quite possibly poisoned by the Boyars. Her remains were actually tested later and did show unusually high contents of mercury. Unfortunately, that barely proves anything because mercury was super popular in makeup at the time as an awesome way to make your face pale and pretty. Needless to say, the history of cosmetics and beauty trends is a very depressing one. With Yelena's death, the Boyars, most notably the Shuisky brothers, got back into the regency game. I know that for English speakers, this last name is so not ideal, but that's not the last we've heard of these guys, so get on board. Ivan IV, soon to be the terrible one, spent several years under their care, whatever that meant, and in 1547, at the age of 15, which was the adulthood at the time, was crowned. Specifically, he was crowned as a Tsar. His father and grandfather just sort of played with the title, but he made it into a thing. The idea very likely wasn't his own. Possibly it belonged to the Russian Church Metropolitan at the time. The whole religious meaning that went with the title would sure make a good case for that. This is the age when the secular and the religious meaning of the rule begin to merge into one, and when the concept of the divine origin of the Tsar gains traction. And this is where I'll stop for today. Next time, Ivan IV. The good, the terrible, and seriously, did he kill his son? See you then.